Hey, we're ready to go here. I'm here today with Itzia Munoz, who I've known for a couple of years, perhaps, and she's a Gen Zer,
Yeah.
which is considerably younger than my generation of geezers, builders, boomers, in that area. But it has struck me over my time of knowing Itzia is that she is a very unique person from the place of where she is, her age, and the fact that she's kind of an old soul. So, Itzia, I'd like to have you kind of tell our viewers what your background is and
Okay.
what your age is and what you're doing in school and so forth.
So I am 22 years old, born and raised in San Diego, California. I am Latina, Chicana, if you'd like to say that. I'm Mexican, so both my parents are from Mexico City. I'm currently studying art, media, and design, and I am currently studying in Cal State San Marcos, and I'm a junior currently. Gonna graduate next year in spring, which is the plan. And yeah, and I'm work currently two jobs. What's it called? One kind of full-time-ish, and then the other one only part-time. And
And
that's
you
what I
have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have one younger brother. He's a year and a month younger than me. He's 21 right now. He's about to turn 22 this year, and I'm turning 23 this year.
So you're the oldest
I'm the
daughter?
oldest sister. Yeah, I'm the
Oh,
oldest daughter. I'm the oldest kid. I am the golden child of the family, I guess you can say.
you're the golden child. What
Yeah.
makes you the golden child?
So my brother was born with ADHD,
Hmm.
and he is on the spectrum a little bit, but he's still able to live his life, and he actually lives in San Diego. I live now in Escondido with my parents. Um, and so I was kind of growing up always the person that my parents would go to when it came to translating things and making phone calls to the bill company or making phone calls to the electricity person. Or if I was like at a grocery store and we needed something, I was the translator for many years. I still sometimes am, but they've gotten better as I've gotten older. But that's kind of why I say I'm like, I guess the golden child. I'm the kid that's gonna graduate college first and be the first generation college student, all these other things.
What motivated you to be the first in terms of being as industrious as you are, working two jobs and so forth? Where did that come from?
My parents mostly, but it would be a lie if I just said only my parents. I think it a lot when I was in high school. I wasn't very close to my parents. I was actually like really distant from them for
Hmm.
whatever reason that we had some family issues at the time.
Hmm.
And I got really close to a teacher. And I don't know if you knew this actually. I don't think we've talked about this, but I went to a school that was like a medical school
Hmm.
in San Diego. So I was actually studying to be a nurse for a little bit. And
Hmm.
then I didn't love it. And then while I was in high school, I did fire science. I was in a fire academy. I was a cadet.
Hmm.
And the chief of the school, Captain Swift, I still have so much love for him. Because of him, he kind of made me realize that like whatever I was going through was gonna pass. And so there was no point of me being like really sad all the time because it got to a point where in high school my grades were dropping, and I wasn't the best student in the world. I had issues with my teachers. And so he came up to me and basically told me, he laid it out for me and told me, hey, this is what you're doing and this is what's going to happen if you keep going this route. I understand that you're going through stuff, but that doesn't mean that you need to stop trying. And so he's like, everyone, he said something that always stuck to me, and I still remember it to this day, where he says that somebody always has it worse than you, and so somebody always has it best than you. So just keep moving forward. And so I always remember that whenever I feel like I'm in a funk and I'm sad for a week, I'm like, why am I so sad that somebody else is probably having a worse time than I am? Then I might as well work hard and continue and be
That
a better.
is really, that's a great part of your story. He sounds quite influential. Have you stayed in touch with him over the years?
Yes, I've stayed in touch with him. I've known him since I was maybe 14, 15. And I still message him and I still text him. I still visit him at the high school. And he's definitely I at the time I wasn't very close to my dad as much as in the beginning we kind of talked about how I was very close to my dad. At the time I didn't talk to my dad, and I he was like my second dad at the time. So he's still a very, very big part of my life. Whenever something big happens and a big change happens, I always go to him and kind of talk to him about it, and we talk about it and look at my options and things like that.
Well, that was one of my questions. Who do you go to for advice? And it sounds like that's something that you did when you were, how old were you when you first started meeting with him?
15 years old, 16.
15 years old, and you're 22 now. So if you were to give advice from a person that was 22 to a person 14, 15 that was going through similar sorts of issues, either with their parents or with school or with other individuals, whether it's bullying or whatever, what would your advice be?
I would give the same advice that he gave me, that somebody always has it worse and someone else has it always better. But something that I also learned was that it's okay to be sad and it's okay to take a break. And it's something that I had to learn in my new relationship, was that I I'm very closed off when it came down to my emotions. So whenever if somebody ever told me that, I kind of just told them like, okay, like are you very closed off? And they said yeah, then I would understand that. Whenever something hard is happening in my life, I shut down and I don't tell anybody, and no one will ever find out that I'm going through this tough thing until I essentially break down. And that was unhealthy because, you need a break. You need that 5 minutes of just crying, and that's fine. So I'll always say that it's okay to be sad, but don't be sad for too long. Be sad for 2 days, be sad for a day, but keep moving forward. Don't let that one thing keep you from doing better things in your life.
Does that hold true with your other emotions? I mean, there's a whole spectrum of different emotions of negative emotions, fears, anxieties, uh, sadness. Is that something that you would say you're self-aware of as well now
Yeah,
because of your past experience?
yeah, I'm very much self-aware about it now. I was very Yeah, I was a very sad slash angry person before, I think. And now I'm not. But I do that with all of my emotions. So if I'm angry about something, I don't let it affect me for too long. Especially working in like a restaurant and like just in general the service industry, you meet a lot of people, and sometimes those people aren't very nice to you. Something that I had to learn really quickly was to let things go and to not let it go throughout your day, and basically remember that one moment, that those 30 minutes that you had with that person basically.
In other words, that person's not necessarily picking on you because of you, but because of maybe they've had a bad
Yeah, they
day or
just
they're hungry or
they're
whatever the case
angry,
may
or
be.
they're having a bad day, or they went through traffic, or they waited an hour for a table and things like that. And it's kind of like I don't let it affect me as much anymore. I think before I started serving when I was 17. So
Hmm,
as a 17-year-old kid, and like someone
wow.
yelled at me, I would cry automatically. 100% would cry. Now I'm kind of just like I laugh it off and I'm like, "Oh, okay, for sure." And then as soon as I bring their food, they're like happy, and I'm like, "Yeah, I assumed you were angry because you hadn't had your food yet."
So how did you, is there any instance where you see the reconciliation with your dad? You indicated that you had a tough time. Does that coincide with your change in attitude in general, or was that part of the healing process of that relationship?
Little bit of both. I learned to let things go before I connected with him again. I was 16 when me and my dad weren't talking. We talked, but he was working so much and I was so into school. I think I would talk to him once a week, if that.
Mm,
And we lived in the same house.
mm.
So we somehow
Wow.
yeah, it was I was going through college classes when I was a senior in high school. So whenever he was coming home from work, which was like midnight, I would be going to sleep because I had to go to school at 5 in the morning for my college classes. So it was, and he was obviously asleep because he had to go to work the next day. So we never saw each other. And so we only see each other once a week. And we also were not in the same page a lot of the times. So me
Mhm.
and him would fight all the time. So when we stopped fighting, I was maybe 18, and he was the one that taught me to let go of things when it came down to customers and things like that. And so then I used that for other things in general, where it came down to me and him having to have a really hard conversation basically and talk about why we didn't talk and what we went through and why the things that happened. And I kind of just had to remember what my teacher said and also what he said, and basically be like, okay, you know what, it's been 2 years, like I think I'm okay and I can forgive now. And I don't think there's a point of holding grudges. I think grudges are like kind of poisonous. I feel like you
Mhm.
shouldn't hold a grudge for too long.
Mhm.
And so it was one of those things where I was like, well, you're my dad, I shouldn't hold this grudge. I forgive you, we've talked about it, we're growing, and it's been good now. We haven't had, I'm very close to my dad now. We're like best friends now, so it's good.
How about your mom? Where did your mom fit
So
into the
my mom
relationship?
and me, God, that's a whole thing too. So my mom and me had issues when we were like, I was 15 or 16. And she is still stay at home, but at the time she was a stay at home mom. And so my mom and her, so I'd see her every day, unlike my dad, where I would only see him once a week and we would fight. No, it was bad with my mom. My mom, we would wake up angry at each other and we would sleep angry with each other. Like that's how, yeah, it was a very, very like toxic relationship at the time. But what had happened with that, we're best friends now too, funny enough. But what really kind of made us stop fighting was me and my mom were fighting really bad. I can't even tell you why we were fighting, but we were fighting really bad this one time in the living room. And we were face to face with each other, yelling, essentially, like in the movies, like literally kind of type of thing. And in some point, my mom just stops yelling at me. And my mom is short. I am 5'7". My mom is 5'2". So
Oh,
I am yelling at this short woman and she is yelling at me and we're both bickering at each other at this point. And she stops yelling at me at some point. Literally just stops, like pauses. And I didn't know what to do because like I was just like ready for her to say even worse things. And so I was waiting there for 2 seconds until I realized that she had stopped because my brother was sitting at the dinner
oh,
table holding
mm,
my dog, like petting
mm,
her, because she was
mm,
like she's like a service animal kind of.
mhm,
So she was a support animal at the time for him. So whenever he had anxiety or was like scared, he
mm,
would hold
mm,
her.
mm.
So I remember my mom just kind of looking at me and we both looked at each other and we were like, what are we doing? Like, what is like, we're literally, it got to a point where we were obviously affecting my little brother at this point. And he obviously was like noticing everything. And we had to both kind of remember, like, why are we doing this? Like, it's obviously gotten to a point where now it's affecting him. And so we stopped completely after that. We both sat down after that and we were like, okay, we need to talk about this. And we talked about everything. We cried, we hugged, and it was like a cute little moment. And then it's been good ever since. And now whenever we're both sad.
Between your mom and dad, which, where do you get your various personality traits from? Because you're both, you know, strong-willed is a common thread with both of
Mhm.
you. But personality-wise, who do you,
Personality wise,
yeah,
oh
who do you
God,
replicate?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I think my dad, maybe my dad, but yeah, maybe my dad. My mom's a lot more social than I am. I think she's a lot more bubbly. I'm more a little. I'm trying to be more bubbly and I'm trying to be more extroverted, but I'm a very introverted person originally.
What do you feel is the reason you need to be more extroverted as opposed to being who you are? I mean, that's a, you know, if you're, I guess it depends to a certain degree on your career.
Yeah.
Uh, but how do you see the reason why you feel the need to be more bubbly, whatever that means?
So last year I struggled a lot with being very lonely.
Hmm.
I didn't have many friends, and that was mostly just because we grew up and like my high school friends, we drifted apart, and then there were some other friends that I had issues with, and it got very lonely very quickly. So it got to a point where I was kind of just like I would have days where um I would want to do things and I had no one to text. Or I would get sad about something and or I would get upset about something and I would want to call somebody, but there was no one to call. So it got to a point where I was like, okay, like I'm obviously very like closed. And it was a self-destructive type of thing because people would ask me to hang out and I would say no. Or I would make excuses not to go. Or people would in class would like want to hang out and I'd always make an excuse not to go because I felt uncomfortable in this situation.
Hmm.
And then it was also times where I went to go to like speeches for graphic designers and things like that. Like there was one time where I was invited to go to by a friend to go hear speeches from graphic designers and
Mhm.
what their career is like and all about that is networking. I spoke to not a single person that night because I
Hmm.
was so shy and I was so scared and I didn't want to talk to we literally left like immediately after the speeches were done because I was uncomfortable and I honestly didn't want to go. And so I made it a goal this year to not be so closed off and not end the conversation so quickly with people, which has worked out really well. I've made great connections this year. I've made great friendships this year. I've made friends that I can see myself having friendships for years and years. So that's why I say that I think that I was very self-destructive with my introvertness. And I also think that tables have noticed in the aspect of like me serving. I think I'm a lot more friendly with people now. I think before I was so like sad or angry or whatever, where I could tell that my tables kind of could tell that I wasn't as into the conversation as maybe they were. So it was kind of like that.
So from the standpoint of at your age now, at 22, at speaking to another young person, male or female, or do you think there's a difference for that matter, male or female, that is kind of trapped in their place where they are, where they're isolated and lonely? You know, during this COVID thing, that really changed a lot of circumstances because there's isolation and
Yeah.
solitude, and that can exacerbate mental health issues, create issues with alcoholism, other forms of addictions. But what would you say to a 14, 15, 16-year-old person, 17-year-old person that was feeling that? Is there a technique of self-talk that you engaged in, or what was the trigger that made you aware of your circumstances?
I cried to my boyfriend. That's literally what happened. It was one of those things where I think I had gotten in an argument with him and we had gotten in a small fight or whatever. And I literally had no one to talk to about it. So it was kind of like those things where I was just like, oh, like I literally have no one to talk to. And it was like he would go with his friends and then I was just like by myself. So it was a lot of like things where I would notice that I was just by myself and I didn't have anyone to text to like go hang out with.
Hmm.
Those who I did text were like past friends that like had already moved on and kind of did their own thing. And I would like be like, hey, like let's hang out. And then they would be like, oh, well, I already have plans with X, Y, and Z people. And so then I was like, oh, well, dang, like I really don't have anybody. In matters of like what really like makes what really works for me when it comes down to talking to people is I'll start really random conversations. So if I notice that it's quiet in like a group or if I like think somebody's like kind of interesting, I'll first compliment something around them. And then either it being like an outfit thing or something on their backpack or on their laptop. And then I'll start conversation like that. And then if it kind of gets bleak, I'll be like, do you believe in ghosts? Like things like that, where it's where obviously they just don't expect it and it's kind of like a fun conversation and it just gets them talking and then like you don't believe in ghosts, well I do, let me tell you what I do. And then I'll tell them a story and they're like, really? Well, this did happen to me like years ago. And it gets them talking and gets people comfortable.
How did you learn this technique?
I i started just talking and it kind of just worked for me. I started noticing things at first. Honestly, something that I will say didn't work for me, which I think this is where my old school mindset kind of comes in. I would get people's Instagrams and social media
Hmm.
and I'll text them and I'll be like, hey, like, let's hang out. And it never went past a message. We never ended up hanging out. But for whatever reason, whenever I like actually have a conversation with somebody and actually like in person, it always worked out for me. And those people are now my friends. But all the people that before, like last year when I was like, oh, like let me get your Instagram so we can hang out outside of like school or outside of work, it never worked out. It never actually went out of the messaging. It was always either I would make an excuse or they would make an excuse. And we would be very good messaging people, but that's about it. It never went further than that.
So are you suggesting that social media, which is certainly an in thing now among younger people in particular, I think us geezers can learn something from that as well. Are you suggesting that the in-person relationship is more long-lasting
I guess
than
so. At least for me, from what I've experienced. I think whenever I've messaged people and like whenever I get their Instagram or their social media, I'll message them and we'll be very good friends when we're messaging. But then it would never ever go further than that. So
Hmm.
then when I noticed that that wasn't working, instead of saying getting their social media, I would get their phone number and I would text them. There was a few people where I hadn't talked to in like weeks, and I texted them because I had their phone number because I had asked for their phone number, and I was like, "Hey, are you down to go to the beach today?" And they would say, "Yeah," and we would go, and now we're friends now. And then there'd be other people would be like, "Oh yeah," and then they'd cancel for whatever reason, and then we would never hang out again. But I've seen better improvement of me just kind of having a conversation with them in person first before we go into the
the
social media.
social media
Yeah.
aspect? Yeah, yeah. Wow. In terms of looking forward now, you're a junior. Where
Junior.
do you see yourself in 5 years? What do you want to do with your degree?
Oh my God, between oh my God, that's a long time.
Well, even if you took a year, like you're going to graduate next year,
Yeah,
right? What do you want to do? Are you interning someplace or what's your
I'm
plan?
not currently. The goal in 5 years, where I see myself in 5 years, I see myself hopefully working for a company. I've been looking at video games a lot recently. So I think my goal is to work with a company in video games and kind of just tip my toes in there and travel a lot, travel so much. I want to go to Europe next.
Have
I
you
went
been to Europe?
No, I haven't. So as you know, I went to Japan
Hmm.
I'm going back to Japan in January again this next coming year. But the next trip is Europe, and then we want to go to Vietnam and then Korea.
How did you happen to go to Japan? Why don't you tell me, refresh my memory on the Japan thing and how and what was your experience like
That was
there? You know,
amazing.
Japanese people, since I'm Japanese American, but uh, can be very close-minded in terms of a culture. What was your experience?
So I went to Japan last year in January, so 2023,
Mhm.
2023 in January. I went with my boyfriend and my brother, my younger brother. We spent about $645 on a round trip from LAX to Japan, and we stayed for a week and a half.
Wow.
We loved it so much that I'm going back next year.
What did you love about it?
I love the culture. The people, I do understand that you say that a lot of Japanese people you are closed off. We honestly didn't experience that,
Hmm.
thankfully. So that was honestly one of our biggest fears, that we would be kind of turned down as tourists. But I think also, to be fair, we did go to a lot of touristy areas because it was our first trip. Like, I think as a tourist, you have to do the tourist stuff. So we did a lot of touristy things, but we also did a lot of research before we got there. So there was, I won't say that we did notice like other people that were tourists and they weren't as respectful as we were, I think.
Mhm.
So we definitely studied the culture before. We studied if on tattoos, especially since as you know, like I have a full sleeve of tattoos. I covered my tattoos the whole time in the trip.
Really?
Like the last day. Yeah, I did not show my tattoos at all. And it was more of a respect thing for me because I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And so when we went to like a bathhouse, I had to get my own room because if you have tattoos, you can't be in the public bathhouse. So I went into my own bathhouse and everything.
I didn't know that that's a rule that you
It's
if
a
you
rule,
have to.
yes. Yeah, so
Oh,
they either you are not allowed inside at all, or you have to book your own private one, which is more money, but it's fine.
what's the rationale behind it? Is it
Um, I think it's supposed to be like in Japan, if you had tattoos, you were part of a gang. It was like a Japanese gang and things like that.
mm,
So I
mm.
think that's what it was from. So they're not very there was a few people that I saw that were Japanese and had tattoos, but they also were younger. And so I didn't see any like older generations with tattoos. We got lost in some point in our trip in the train station. It's like the biggest train station in Tokyo. And we were trying to get to Osaka at the time. And we were lost for I think 20 minutes.
And you
We
don't speak Japanese,
not
obviously.
speak a single word of Japanese. We are lost in this train station. Everyone knows where they're going. It's so weird. It's almost like an ant farm down there, and everyone knows where they're going. They're all following each other, and they know where their train is. And we looked so lost with our luggage, and it was so embarrassing for like 10 minutes until some God bless him. This Japanese man came up to us. He's like, "Do you need help?" And I was like, "Yes, please help us." And he
In
helped
English,
us
did he speak
in
English?
English. Yeah, he knew. He knew we did not know a single word of Japanese. And he's like, "Do you need help?" And we're like, "Yes, please." And we showed him our where we had to go, our train. And he's like, "Oh, it's over here. Follow me." And we followed him to the train station. This stranger could have kidnapped us and we 100% would have followed him, but we followed him and he showed us where the train was, and we said thank you so much and he left. And so it was, I feel like we didn't experience any people really staring at us or treating us poorly or anything. Everybody was so nice and respectful. We never felt like we were out of place, weirdly enough, especially since we had done our research beforehand and we kind of knew what we were putting ourselves into and getting ourselves into. So it was nice though. It was definitely a trip. It was an amazing trip.
It sounds like your boyfriend is quite adventuresome to
Yes, he
team
is.
up like that. He sounds like a great influence on you.
He's definitely been a really good influence on me. Yeah, I will say that. Yes, he has been a good influence on me.
Is he
Sometimes.
in a similar sort of career hopes as you, or is he in a?
No, so I honestly will probably butcher it, but I think you knew he was a professional video gamer for a little bit before.
Mhm.
And then now he's working for a company, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know a lot about it. He explains it to me, and I always end up getting a little lost sometimes. But he works from home and he works for a company that works for Google or something like that, or like kind of works for Google, but he works from home and he does like office stuff that I don't know how to explain very well, so I don't want to butcher it too bad. But he's definitely a person that I've learned that networking is important because that's how he got his job now. He networked his way into it, and basically somebody that followed him on his stream and was a fan was like, "Hey, I heard you're looking for a job. I have at my job, I'm the boss there, and I'm looking for somebody. I think you'd be a great fit." And he got the job.
So is that something that you could emulate yourself in terms of your own career as far as what you hope to do when you graduate, interning wise, and then segueing into a permanent position, perhaps?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I think I've definitely been influenced in the way of how he's done things, kind of, and kind of working his way up on that. So I think I've definitely look at him as an example most times when it comes to me thinking about my own future.
So
Because
when you talk about your specific talents from from an educational standpoint and from a creative standpoint, where do you see your real strengths? What's if this was a job interview, what would you say to the
being
interviewer?
terrible. um,
Are
what
you
would I say?
creative? Are you creative? Are
I'm
you
creative. I'm creative. Definitely a leader sometimes, most times. And I do really good with teamwork, but I'm also very organized. I think that when I say creative, I think a lot of people think messy for some reason. So I always have to tell them like, "Oh, I'm organized, by the way. Like I know how to do things and things like that."
would you say you're a perfectionist or self-disciplined, or what are the other characteristics that lead
Um,
you to be able to be a leader, to be a participant in a team? What do you base that on?
I would say I'm definitely self-disciplined. I think I'm also perfectionist. I wouldn't say perfectionist, only because as much as I do want things to go my way sometimes, I also think that's unhealthy because as a team, you should hear people's ideas. I think I've been part of a lot of team stuff going through college and team projects where I've seen people's idea. I've seen like one person kind of do everything, and then there's us, the background people, and kind of just being like, well, we had this idea and we kind of wanted to do this, but now. So I think I'm not a perfectionist, but I have discipline in the aspect of like if you tell me that something needs to be perfect, I will try my best to make it as perfect as it possibly can for you.
So
Okay.
if you were going to design the ideal job for your personality with your self-awareness, your self-knowledge, what would that look like? What kind of job would that look like? What kind of career would it look like?
Video gaming, I think. I think video gaming is very creative, but it's also very exact. I don't know if that makes sense. It's basically like they know what they want and they know what they need, but they give you the world to be creative in an aspect, so they don't just limit you. It's not very limiting. That's a good word for it. It's not limiting. I think that's where I think I would want my career to be, somewhere where yes, they tell me what they want, but I get to have some creative freedom in it, or at least I can give suggestions. So I would probably like to work from home, but I also think that I would like to go into the office like maybe twice a week because I believe that I'm a very in-person type of person. So I really like seeing my coworkers and being able to talk to you as a person. As much as Zoom is great, I think there's just a different type of feelings, and it's very different. I think it's better in a way. And so as much as I do like the idea of working from home, I like the idea of working from home like 3 days and maybe 2 days in an office. That's kind of how I am. I'm very much in the middle ground when it comes down to that, because I would like to see the people that I'm at least working with and get to know them maybe in a personal level. I think in Zoom, it's just hard. You can't really do that unless you're in Zoom the whole time, the whole 8 hours of working. So I think I would like to get to know them. So I would want to be in person with them as well.
So from the standpoint of, again, offering advice to a younger person that was maybe starting college, how, and you changed from nursing to where you are right now,
Good.
was that self motivated to do that, or were you influenced by somebody else, or what suggestions would you give to that younger person?
Um, don't stress about wanting to know what you want to do exactly when you get into college. No one knows what they want to do. If they do, they're lying. In the back of their head, there's like that one career that they're like, well, maybe. Like, I think that everyone has two careers that they kind of want to have, and they chose one that they really kind of want to have. And then there's always that one in the back of your head that's kind of like, well, maybe a little bit. So no one actually knows what the heck they're doing in college. Everyone's winging it, everyone's trying. I think that's like, that would have been nice to know when I first went into college. I think because everyone thought that everyone knew what they wanted to do, everyone acted as if they knew what they were doing, which is really hard because obviously, again, first generation college student, no one in my family has gone to college. I don't know what the heck I'm doing at 18 years old in a college town or whatever. And that would be my biggest advice. Don't stress too much about changing your major. I changed my major 3 times. I was actually a
Oh,
I was a criminal justice major when I first started. Then I switched to nursing, and then I switched to art, media, and design. And the way that it kind of went was I wanted to do criminal justice because I was really into forensics and things like that. So I really liked science in that aspect. But then I looked more into it and it just wasn't worth it for what I really wanted to do. So I thought, I was like, okay, maybe I can try nursing since I had tried nursing in high school. And I knew that I was pretty decent at it. And I had the EMT certification, and I had done some college classes in high school. So I knew a lot about nursing and EMT and paramedics. So I knew a lot about health in general. So that was kind of like my easy route. And um what had happened, what really made me go into art, media, and design was I had gone to internship at an emergency room, and somebody was code blueing, which basically means that they're going under
mhm.
cardiac arrest and everything. And I did CPR on them. And so as an intern, you don't know that I did not know I was going to do that. They pushed me into the room and were like, you're going to do it. And I said, okay. And so I did CPR and they lived, thankfully. But I would walk around and kind of listen to these nurses, and there was like a moment where I was kind of there, and as much as I loved it and it looked fun, I thought about it more long term and was like, okay, but am I gonna like this in 10 years? And I kind of told myself that I wouldn't.
Mm.
And I told myself, I was like, well, okay, well, why don't I try it for a little longer? Maybe I'm just second guessing it because I had done CPR on somebody and it kind of traumatized me or whatever. And um I did another internship, did not like it. Well, not that I didn't like it, I liked it. It's just, again, I was thinking of it more long term, and I was like, well, okay, in 10 years, am I gonna love what I do? Am I gonna be happy with where I'm at? And am I gonna love my job? And the easiest answer I could get to was always no. And I knew that I was going to be unhappy. I knew the money was going to be good, and I knew that I would have been hard worker and a workaholic, but I also knew that I was going to be a very unhappy person. And so I knew that it wouldn't be good for me long term. So I decided that, you know what, I need to look into something else. So I did. And I started thinking of things that I like to do. And I was like, well, I like drawing a lot. And I never thought about it as a career. So why don't I look into it? And I found graphic designing, and then I saw animation, and then I saw video game design and script writing and video games and jobs that I didn't know existed that I thought would be fun. And so I changed my major, and I've loved it ever since. It has been the most fun I've had in a while.
It sounds like you didn't necessarily have a career advisor per se. It sounds like you combined self-awareness with open-mindedness and curiosity that landed you where you are now. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that to be fair, my teacher, Captain Swift, he did influence me a little bit in wanting to be
Mm,
a nurse. Just because he always thought that I'd be a great nurse and he always thought that I'd be a really, really good paramedic.
mm,
Um, I was one of the top of my classes, one of my top of the class when I was in high school. So he knew I knew my stuff and he knew that I was really good at it. But it just wasn't for me. And so it was a lot of me having to kind of think about myself because every time I chose what I was doing, every time I thought about my career, I thought about everyone else except me. So I would think like, okay, what would
mm,
make my teacher proud?
mm,
Okay, nursing would make him proud.
mm.
Well, what would help my parents long term? Well, nursing would help my parents long term, and it would also make them really proud. Okay, cool. So I'm making everybody proud, and I'm getting a good career in the run. Okay, so that's what I should do. And so that's kind of how I made myself go into nursing and kind of convince myself that I loved nursing and I really wanted to do it and that I should put my 100% into it until um funny enough, um people in my community were like, "Well, do you like it?" And I didn't know how to respond. And so it was always that kind of awkward moment where I thought about it and I'd be like, well, yeah, I guess I do like it. But I always thought they always told me like you shouldn't say I guess, like you should say I like it. And I'm like, well, I do like it, but and they're like, well, but what? And then it just kind of began making my brain turn and I was like, well, yeah, I don't really like it, but I do think that it's gonna make everyone else proud of me. So it was a lot of me having to be selfish and having to be like, okay, and it ended up working out because as soon as I told everybody that I changed my major, they were like, "Oh, great!" Even like my teacher, he was like, "Oh, I'm so happy for you." I was like, "I thought you would have been mad." He's like, "No, as long as you're happy, I'm happy." So it was just like a lot of like self-learning and kind of having to tell myself like, "Oh, I'm not gonna disappoint everyone if I just change my major and do something else. Like I'll be okay."
Did you discuss any of these things with your mom and dad, or is it
Nope, I changed it right away. I changed it all by myself.
you did?
Yeah, I did. It wasn't anything that I talked to them about. The only person I did talk to about it was my boyfriend at the time, but he was going to UCSD at the time.
Mm.
We were both kind of in college at the time, and I kind of brought it up to him and I was like, "Well, I'm kind of thinking about changing my major." And he supported me and he helped me change my major. We put in all the papers, fixed my financial aid and everything.
That's kind of a question I wanted to ask you about also. It's is basic knowledge. Of course, you know, in your one of your in your two jobs now, you're obviously use uh, the technology and credit cards and so forth. But on the consumer side, uh, either renting an apartment, renting a house, applying for credit, budgeting, doing all these basic knowledge things. Did you absorb that just in your going through life, or did you ask somebody, hey, how do I apply for a credit card, or how the basic knowledge aspect? How did you go from being, a high school student to a
Adult.
self-sufficient person that you are today? What was your steps that you took to learn these things?
Um, so credit card was my parents. They're actually, funny enough, the first people that did tell me about credit cards. But they were honest with me and they basically told me, hey, we're not really good at saving money. You should talk to your cousin, Shirley. I'm sure you remember her.
Shirley.
Shirley. She has really good credit and she has a really good history in credit. So I went to her first when it came down to my credit card. And I basically asked her to sit me down and was like, explain this to me because I have no idea what I'm doing. And so she did. She explained, the credit limits and, loans and all these other things. And so she's really the person who I went to when I first got a credit card. Um, when I started growing, for example, when I got my car and I put a loan in my car and everything, I asked my dad because he had experience in that. And so he was the one that went with me and did the dealership and everything. And I ended up getting like a really good APR in my car because I was like a first time buyer. And I also had really, really good credit thanks to my cousin because I knew how to use my credit card. And then as I grew older, I didn't really do much. When it came down to college applications, thankfully my mom put me in a first generation college student program.
Hmm.
And so I was doing that throughout high school. So they were the ones that helped me to do that, like financial aid, how to pick my classes.
Mhm.
When it came down to actual college and I was 18 years old, I had to figure it out all by myself. I didn't know where my classes were. I didn't know how to pay for parking. I didn't know we had to pay for parking. I didn't like I none of this was told for me to me. So I legitimately had to go and look for help and basically was told somebody, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you help me? And it was an advisor at the time that helped me a little bit. COVID happened and I now know more. So now I don't really need help with that. When it comes down to my 401k, my credit cards now, my boyfriend, I call him my financial aid advisor. He checks everything most of the time. And I kind of tell him, hey, this is what I have now, help me. And so he usually helps me figure things out because he has a lot of older friends, weirdly enough, that are like in their 30s and 40s that are really well off.
Oh, wow, that's really old.
Yeah, they're older. I said older. I didn't say old. I said older. Older friends who are pretty well off and they're really, really, really responsible financially. So they teach him and then he teaches me. So I now have like some investments in my 401k. I have like a really good credit card. I have like two really, really good credit cards and I've never been past due in payments or anything like that. So those are things that I've just have had to have self-discipline because at the end of the day, nobody can force me to pay my credit cards or pay my loans. So that's more of like a self-discipline thing where I had to learn myself how to like control my spending and also know how to save money.
How did you learn that? See, that's a subject that is really, there've been scientific experiments about delaying gratification. There's the marshmallow test about, you may have heard of that, where kids were given the opportunity to eat a marshmallow. The teacher had to go out of the room, and when they came back, the teacher said, if you wait until I come back to eat the marshmallow, I'll give you a second marshmallow. And they tested those kids that ate the marshmallow as soon as the teacher left the room versus the kids that waited and got the second marshmallow, which is delaying gratification. And those that delayed gratification and waited for the second marshmallow were generally more successful in life. They had higher SAT scores and earned more money and so forth. But it all comes down to delaying gratification. So it sounds like you have that ability to delay gratification.
Yeah, I definitely am very self-disciplined when it comes to money in general. I think I've met people and I've like seen videos of people being like, oh yeah, I have like $11 in my bank account. I would literally have a panic attack if I had that in my bank account because I save, I try to save as much as I can. And I still go out and I still spend a little bit of money, but I always know that if I have self-discipline to be able to say, hey, you know what, maybe not today, we'll go out next week after I work like a few shifts. So I think that's helped me a lot. I learned that really young though. I learned that when I was like in high school.
Who did you learn that from?
My mom, she forced me to give her half my paycheck and half my tips every single time because I had started working when I was 17. I was still in high school. I was still a senior in high school. So she was taking me to work and picking me up from work. And every time, every shift, she'd be like, how much do you make? I made 150. Okay, give me half. And she'd put it in my savings. And so because of her, like I learned that I needed to save money. And it was the gratitude thing where there was a point in like I had finally graduated high school and I wanted to get a laptop. I had not never owned a laptop in my life. And I told her, I was like, well, I want to buy a laptop. She's like, well, you have a good amount in your savings. You can buy one. And it was crazy to me because she obviously always told me no, I couldn't spend money in my savings, and now she's finally letting me. And I'm like, wait, you're actually letting me? And she's like, yeah, you need a laptop for college. That's fair. Use it for that. And so I did. I used it for my first laptop. It was like a $700 laptop that was on sale for college students, and she let me buy it for myself. And it felt so nice and it felt great, and because it was my money and I had worked so hard for it and I had saved money. But if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have learned how to save so much money so easily.
Well, it sounds like your parents, on a number of different levels, really have contributed to not only your personality, but specifically areas that allowed you to delay gratification, develop self-discipline, give you the freedom to change your major, to um, be where you are today. So that's got to feel real gratifying for you.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. I will say that I like definitely have won the lottery when it comes to my parents. I always say that it's kind of nice because as much as I talk about when I was in high school, we didn't get along. And whenever I talk about myself in high school, I always get very embarrassed because I always say that I wasn't like the greatest kid. But whenever I say that, my parents always correct me and they're like, no, you were a good kid. You were just going through a lot. And so it's always kind of nice because I say that I have very good parents. If I definitely wouldn't be the person that I am now if it weren't for my parents.
So as an influencer, both for people that are coming up behind you, and also as an influencer to those that are in other generations in front of you, like the 30s, 40s, 50-year-olds, what kind of um, suggestions would you have on either side of that case for people that are confused or unsure of what their next step should be? Do you have any suggestions?
I don't know. I feel like whenever I don't know the next step, I just kind of lay everything out in front of me and kind of tell myself like, okay, what do I have now? And that's what I would say. I was like, okay, well, something that my mom always tells me is that I worry about a lot of things, like future tense. She's like, why are you worried about it now if it hasn't happened? And it's fair, which I think is fair. But I always tell them that whenever I do think about things like that, I kind of lay everything in front of me and I'm like, okay, well, what is my life now? What am I doing now to make things better or for what I'm working for in the future? And then I kind of give myself a realistic goal for like a year from now or 6 months from now. I'm like, okay, what do I want to change 6 years, 6 months from now? And that's kind of how I do it. First, I do like 3 months, 3 months realistically, what do I want to do? Then six, and then a year, and then so forth. And that's kind of how I do it for myself. And whenever I freak out or whenever I have this anxiety, I always tell myself, okay, I was like, okay, well, what's my 3 month plan? And then I'll tell myself my 3 month plan, and then I'll stop freaking out, and then I'll just keep continuing that.
There's the hockey player Wayne Gretzky, uh, who is before your time, but his mantra was to skate to where the puck's gonna be.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's baseball, basketball, wherever the ball's gonna be, if you can go to that point, which is what you're saying, you're kind of setting a goal for 3 months, a month, 6 months, a year, and skating to where that goal is going to be. That's really wise.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's something that it also calms you down, really enough. I think it's calmed me down a lot. I think before, instead of maybe thinking short term, middle term, long term, I would just do like super long term. And so then I would start freaking out about the future. And then
Mm.
I would have this anxiety of being like, well, what happens if I can't do it? What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? So then I started giving me shorter, long term goals so I can start. So for example, I started when I really wanted to start going to the gym. I was like, okay, well, let me try going to the gym for 3 months. And then I was like, okay, I did it. Let's try 2 more months. And then it just kind of kept going and going and going.
I'll tell you, that is so insightful. You're a wise person in a young person's body. So I see great things for you ahead, and it's been thanks to your parents, thanks to your advisors that you mentioned. Boy, and then your own self-awareness. Those are those are really impressive, and you can appreciate young people that haven't gone to college or are going to go to college or are in college, much less those older people, like when they reach 40, uh, known as the midlife crisis.
Oh
And,
yeah.
but the issues of problem solving remains the same, whether you're 20, 30, 40, or whatever. The techniques, the template that you've set forth yourself is really going to hold you in good stead. So I tip my hat to you for doing that.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, thank you very much, Itzia, for this.